was to make you the WWE champion right now, what would you do with that title? I'm going to assume walk to the ring with it. I'm going to also assume that you defend it in big matches. And when you went home at night, you'd rub it against your face because you would be so happy that yes, you are now the WWE champion. I mean, you're basically Roman Reigns. When you are a big time wrestler and this honor is bestowed upon you, sometimes you'll come up with really strange things to do with the title. That's what we shall talk about today. My name is Simon Miller, welcome to What Culture Wrestling, and yes, this is 10 more strange things WWE champions did with the title. Number 10, Hulk Hogan buried the WWE title in Japan. Most of the time when Vince McMahon did put the strap around Hulk Hogan's waist, it was really good for business. I mean, go look at the late 80s and even look at when he came back in 2002 and had that mini nostalgia run. Don't pretend this isn't what the fans wanted. They were crying and going, Hulk Hogan, please, please, please. So they gave it to him. In 1993, though, things were very different. Business was not going in the right direction. The needle was going down. So hoping to resurrect what he once had, Vince McMahon went, well, I'll just put the belt back on Hulk Hogan again. It's called WrestleMania 9, and surely then everything will be hunky-dory. And this failed. What really kicked the whole old deal into Rock Roll territory, though, is when the Hulkster did indeed go over to New Japan for some pre-arranged dates. Not understanding how the world worked at the time, Hogan thought he could say whatever the hell he wanted, and it would never get back to America. And have a guess what happened next. So when he said that the current World Wrestling Federation Championship was nothing more than a trinket and the real prize in the sport was the IWGP title, well, it did not sit well with people back home. It likely helped soured the relationship between Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon, which is why he left soon after and wouldn't come back for almost 10 years. Number 9, The Rock threw it off a bridge. We all remember this, and if you were watching wrestling at the time, it was one of those angles that just niggled its way into your brain. And really, I suppose if I'm an example, has never left. The best part was The Rock did it twice, and the more famous of these came after WrestleMania 15, where Rock had lost the belt to Stone Cold Steve Austin. And given that Steve Austin then transformed it into the Smoking Skull belt, well, The Rock thought, I'm gonna get it, and I'm gonna chuck it into the river. When the rattlesnake turned up to stop this too, the Great One also chucked him into the water. And yes, this was a callback to what they did with the Intercontinental title too. That's why it was so good. If you want the true highlight from this though, go back in time and find the super old documentary known as WWF Know Your Role, where The Rock, in character of course, is talking about this and says, that's right, I threw him in the river, he could have died. And as he says those last few words, he laughs because The Rock was a psychopath. Number 8, Mr. Perfect smashes it with a hammer. Between 1988 and 1990, Mr. Perfect essentially did everything but win the world title. And given how good he was, he really should have won it. Because after all those awesome vignettes welcoming him into the WWF, he went on an undefeated streak, he won the Intercontinental Championship, and he joined up with Bobby the Brain Heenan. Feeling like he deserved more though, Perfect lost his mind one day after Saturday night's main event, where he got Hulk Hogan's world title and then took a hammer and basically just smashed it up. The idea, of course, was to try and get under the Hulkster's skin and secure himself a championship match. And while that didn't really work, it's still very entertaining to watch. There's just something funny about a dude with a makeshift weapon. An urban legend was born out of this too after Mick Foley was crowned the first ever hardcore champion. And of course that belt was an old WWF title that had been smashed up. So everybody went, oh, this is the one that Mr. Perfect had a hand in. And it wasn't, some dude just made that up, but it was a very nice tale. Number 7, The Fiend turns it into his face. This one was weird, because even though we were long past the era where you would become a world champion and then get a custom belt, The Fiend obviously wanted to return to this, but his idea was that he would turn it into his face. Now I assume this was done because Bray Wyatt is a really good merchandise seller, so WWE wanted to see if they could hawk these for $6,000. I suppose it did work when it came to matches, because did it look really strange seeing a psycho clown walk towards the ring with another version of his face around his neck? You bet your ass. It left me scratching my bald head though, because I kept asking the question, why would a makeshift serial killer do this? The only real shame is when he lost this damn thing to Bill Goldberg in Saudi Arabia, because WWE had an old, more normal version waiting, and I wanted to see Billy Boy climb the title and hold it up and then stare at it, and it would have been Bray Wyatt's face. Number 6, Chris Jericho has it stolen. When Chris Jericho won his first ever WWF World title, he discovered this courtesy of a joke, because he overheard Vince McMahon talking to The Undertaker saying, well, business must really be going to shit, pal, because tonight we are going to coronate the one and only Chris Jericho. And what a way to discover that your life and career is about to change, but it's also why, when fans like me heard that Chris Jericho had just become the AEW champion and then lost the belt, well, we too assumed that was just a joke. It wasn't. As it turned out, somebody had nicked it from his limousine when he wasn't in the vehicle, causing Jericho having to cut a promo from a hot tub, telling this moron to give it back. A few days later, it was found abandoned on the side of the road because, let's face it, not only did it make headline wrestling news, but the police were tweeting about it too. If I was in possession of that thing, I would get rid of it as fast as I could too. Number 5, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall play basketball with it. If anybody else had done this, there would be uproar. But when it came to Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, they kind of had a way about them where they could do whatever they wanted. And we all laughed. In this instance, it was with a television title, which did have some history to it, but current holder Scott Hall, well, he thought the opposite. He was also the United States champion at the time, and while he gave credence to this belt, when it came to the other one, he described it as tin, so he passed it to Kevin Nash, who then slam dunked it into the bin. Jim Duggan soon arrived on the scene to save it from the rubbish heap, but if at any point in time you had looked at the television title and gone, well, that thing means nothing, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash had just reminded you, never put any kind of importance in it, because if you do, we will quite literally chuck it in the trash. This was WCW though, and let's face it, by the end, nobody, even management, cared. Number 4, the Giant wears both belts. Look at this picture of Paul White. You can't look away from it, can you? Because it is such a strange and weird visual. I mean, who told him to do that? 3 years into his career, though, the soon-to-be Big Show was a World Championship Wrestling Tag Team title holder alongside Scott Hall. But when he came out on WCW Saturday Night, yes, somebody who should have been shot out of a cannon for doing this told him he should wear both belts around his waist. And again, it looked like this. The problem is that Paul White is such a big man, this just looks like he's gone out to Toys R Us and bought a foam version of the belt or a toy one and just considered it really funny. Kenny Omega may have toppled this recently when he was on Impact wearing 3 championships around his body, but again, Kenny Omega is a more normal sized man, whereas the Big Show is a giant. But this is just a sight to behold. The 90s were a very weird time. Number 3, wrestlers taking him to the competition. We are going to do this one entry as many entries because some of these have just been talked about so many times. Like, yes, in 1991, Ric Flair took the WCW title over to the WWF and nobody could believe it. And a few years later, Alundra Blaze took the women's title over to WCW, where much like Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, she threw it in the bin. More under the radar times, though, come when Team 3D wore every single one of their tag team championships where they were in Impact, and Rhino kinda did the same when he turned up to the Impact Zone with the old ECW title. Austin Aries and Kenny Omega have both done belt collector gimmicks too, meaning they showed up in promotions just going, would you like to see my collection? And wearing all the gold in numerous places always works, because WWE has been the dominant force for so long that they never open the forbidden door, so every time it is open and you kinda see 2 companies merging together, well, it's just quite fun. If AEW are also intent on working with as many people as possible, this may come par for the course, and I promise you, I will never get bored of it. Number 2, Mick Foley spits on it. Well, this was quite controversial, and it never really was meant to be. Because after ECW and WCW came to a talent exchange agreement in 1994, fans were very excited, even more so when it was said, oh, we're going to have Mick Foley, who was then Cactus Jack, taking on Sabu. I mean, what a pairing that was. They were both hardcore nuts. Unsurprisingly, Jack was perfect for Extreme Championship Wrestling and everything it stood for. So much so, I think he got caught up in the madness. Because after he had performed and decided that he didn't do himself justice, he took his WCW World Tag Team title, threw it on the floor, and then he spat on it. Now again, this was meant to be a mockery of him, because he felt like he sucked, but when WCW management saw it, they were not pleased at all, and some even said this reason why his push was halted. Not that it made any difference though, because a couple of years after this, he would go on to WWF and become a bona fide Hall of Famer, and as we have said time and time again, a hardcore legend. He's also a super duper nice guy, and that may be the most important part of it all. Number 1, Naomi makes it glow. Given that nobody mentions it now, it's almost like Naomi's 2017 SmackDown Women's Championship run never happened. I think that's a shame. It's mostly because after beating Alexa Bliss for the title at Elimination Chamber, she only held it for a little while before she lost it to Natalya at SummerSlam. mean, we didn't really have a chance to appreciate it at all. In between all that though, she did take her championship belt and load it with LED lights because of course her new gimmick was feeling the glow, and that was all about lights. So what better way to like pimp out your title than by doing this? She even wanted to add more if she had the chance, and this worked oh so well. I mean, sometimes you see these custom belts, you're like, oh my gosh, that's garish, but this one was just really fun, and never forget, wrestling is meant to be fun. It's also something we should do more of when people do get to the top because it makes them feel like an even bigger deal. And once more, the reason nobody discusses this now is because she only had it for 140 days. 140 days in wrestling is nothing. Know of any other strange things that WWE champions did with their titles? Make sure you let us know in the comments below. Like the video, share the video, and please do subscribe. Then head over to whatculture.com where you can read articles like this with your eyes. You can come say hello on social media, and as you're on YouTube, stay on What Culture Wrestling, and please do click another video. My name is Simon for What Culture. I appreciate you stopping by as always, and I'll see you, stop moving, on the next one.